Okay, friends, I was hoping to start the live when the noise settled down, but I think it's just going to keep going. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So you're not just waiting on me. Um, we are doing a redo of the Sunday class on sensory processing because my internet kept kicking me out on Sunday. And so I was notified by some friends that the live stream was ending or the screen was going black. So we're going to retry today. All right, so sensory processing, one of my favorite topics, something I do pretty much every day. Every session is going to touch on that. And a lot of the daycare center programming that I do is 100% based around sensory processing and how to integrate more sensory into classrooms or into your normal programming. So we're going to go over some of those techniques today. But before we start with techniques or jump into how to use it, we need to understand exactly what we mean when we say sensory processing and the way that it affects the brain. So when we hear sensory, especially nowadays, it's like a big catchphrase. One of the first things that pops into your mind is going to be your traditional sand boxes, rice boxes, Play-Doh, all touchy, sticky, messy play. That's very traditional. And it makes people want to shy away from including quote unquote sensory into your classrooms because it can be overwhelming. Or you don't want to pull that out in the middle of your kitchen when you're also a busy parent. So what I want to do today is introduce alternative sensory systems that you can work with and you can use to maximize sensory input. So to do that, we first want to understand where that happens in the brain. This is one of my favorite pictures. This one here shows exactly where sensory processing occurs in the brain. So it's right here in the middle, develops like almost like a full headband, almost ear to ear, if you will. Here's a cross section here so you can kind of see how it comes up over the center of the brain. So it comes in from their spinal cord, your skin, your touch. It comes up the middle, right there into the brain stem, and kind of sucks up the back of the brain and deposits right there into the middle. Something that this picture doesn't show is on the front side of this line, so back side of the brain here, front side of the brain here. On the front side of this middle line is a second area. So if this blue area is where all the sensory stuff comes up and deposits, right in front of that is another little headband shaped line. And that is where you have to develop a motor plan. So if the information comes in from your environment here, floats around for a little bit, kind of gets organized. This is where, this is your front desk at the office. So everything hits the desk, all the files, the papers, the phone numbers, and then somebody behind the desk takes time to take each individual piece of information and put it in the right file. So that's what you're seeing on this blue strip here. This is floating around in there. When it gets sorted, the brain has to develop a response, whether that be motor plans, so like sitting, running, jumping, or speaking, eating, grasping. All of that has to happen very quickly. So it moves from the files here, jumps that little line to the second band, and that's where you create movement or response. And then it tells the front of the brain exactly what it's supposed to be doing. Okay. So when it gets into this area, we have what's called latency. And that is literally just a pause while the brain organizes. So it's almost like you walk into that front office, the lady at the desk is organizing the information and she holds up her finger. Oh, wait 1 second. I'm in the middle of something. This is what you see here. That latency response time can vary from child to child wildly. So some of that latency response is going to be almost immediate and we would never pick it up just by noticing it in our day-to-day. Some kiddos' latency response is very broad and even up to 3 to 5 minutes before you can see a response happening. And that sometimes is when kiddos, you're like, they don't listen to me, they don't listen to me, they don't listen to me. But it's real weird. You'll already be moving on to the next thing thinking that they're not interested in what you're doing or that they're not listening or maybe they don't understand. So you're already going to move on to something else. And all of a sudden they answer the question you asked 4 minutes ago. And you're just like, what? That doesn't connect to anything now. But what was happening is the brain was still, even though you're moved on to other things, the brain was still floating that information around in this blue section. And then all of a sudden it finally jumped the line. And now the motor plan came out. And so that can make kiddos seem a little disconnected. It can also make them look like they're not following directions, but they may be. And you just have to give them that pause. So quick overview. This is a lot more detailed than that. And if we had a lot more time, we would go into more of that. but we don't. So we're going to make it very brief. So this is one of my favorite pictures here, kind of give you a quick visual. Now, we know information comes from multiple different systems, not just touch. So when we talk sensory, it's not just what the skin's bringing in. You have 8 separate sensory systems, and we'll go over those very, very briefly. So you have, of course, your visual and auditory, olfactory, tactile, your touch. You have taste or oral. And then you also have 3 internal senses. So one that I know is a big, also a catchphrase right now, is vestibular. And that is where the brain takes 2 senses. I call them my combination senses. So they take 2 senses and put them together to read one message. Vestibular is eyes and ears and how they talk to each other to tell you where your head is. So am I spinning around in a circle? Am I balanced? Am I, tipping over forward or backwards? So where is my head positioned in relation to my body and my space? That's vestibular. It also has to do with balance. So if you're walking, your brain is always identifying your center of gravity and your center of space. So it has to line up your eyes correctly and move the fluid in your ears. That's all vestibular. Okay. Number 7 on the sensory list, also a combination sense, is proprioception. So proprioception is your body sense. If you were to take a line and cut it right across your neck, anything below that neck is going to be proprioception pretty much exclusively. And so that's ligaments, muscles, the way your body coordinates its movement back and forth, and the way that you have stability and how much muscle contraction is needed. So the key with that sense, proprioceptive sense, is pressure and force. How much do I need to move my leg to kick the ball way over there? How much do I need to push my arms out to get the ball into that basket right here close to me? So reading pressure and space and understanding body movement is all proprioception. The 8th sense that they have fairly recently added as an individual sense. So like when I was in college, proprioceptive would have been your last, that's your 7. Congratulations. Well, now they have a new one that they're identified as an individual sense, and it's called interoception. That is the reading of the internal messages of your body. And I really like this one because it is a way to kind of verbalize what we've been trying to teach kiddos for a long time. How do you know that you're hungry versus have an upset stomach? How can you tell me I have a headache versus I'm tired? How do you know if you're thirsty? So the reading and understanding of the internal body senses, your primary senses, is really important. And that is called interoception. So can I adequately identify what I feel? And that leads you into when that message has to come into that headband space. When you understand interoception correctly, I know I am hungry. Now your motor plan becomes very efficient. I can ask for a snack. But if you don't know where to put the file for interoception in that first space, when you jump that line, your output may be really off. And that creates a lot of frustration for kiddos. And that's where miscommunication happens. They may ask for a drink when they're actually hungry. They may say they're in pain when they're actually have an itch. And so they can get very frustrated with misreading interoception. So that's your 8. 5 basic, we all learn early in our elementary years. And then your 3, 2 combination, 1 internal. So there's your 8. So building on that, we want to talk about how those 8 bring information into the body and how the body has direct response. And the best way I have learned over years of doing this is to describe the sensory system inside your body like a cup or a box that can fill and empty every day. So I drew up this schematic long time ago and use this with a lot of my families. And I use this in a lot of my teachings. This is literally everybody's sensory system. We all have the same basic components. So all the same parts are there. You have your basic sensory capacity. You have your threshold line. We know what threshold is. Threshold is I'm done. I can't handle anymore. I'm full. I'm going to have a behavior. I'm going to crash. I'm going to fall asleep. I'm going to avoid, run away, something like that. We all know what that is. This first line here is called registration. I don't know if you can see that in the screen. Okay, that's called registration. Registration is where the brain has received enough of the sensory information to all of a sudden wake up and be responsive, meaning it can organize very efficiently and it can get rid of unneeded information, keep what's needed, and then organize and jump that line with very little latency, which is what we want to see. That's registration. Now, why the differences in how kiddos respond to sensory? The only thing that changes in a system is where that line is located, if you will. Okay. So registration can either be very high up on your spot, on your box or your cup, or it can be very low down. So I'll explain what the difference is you might see. What happens is if you have a system like this, you have an empty space here, registration, lots of space here, and then threshold. What's happening is you get up in the morning, like most of us, have your cup of coffee, you get dressed, turn on a light or two, maybe play some music. Some people do that. That what you're doing is you're inadvertently feeding your body very steady, controlled sensory information into this empty space, this blank canvas space of your morning. When you've had enough sensory input, and it shouldn't take very much, your brain will alert, and then it'll tell you in your body, your motor plan, that, oh, I'm ready to begin my day. I can organize. I feel settled. Okay. So the joke we always see, like, don't talk to me till I've had my first cup of coffee, actually applies to the sensory system. Don't talk to me. I'm not going to understand you. I'm just going to get irritated. I'm not hearing anything you say because I haven't had enough information in yet to be registered. If you hit registration line nice and early, like this, then you have all of this space for that information to float around on that blue line, meaning you can take in quite a bit of outside interference. So sounds, smells, what you're seeing, all of that can come in. And the brain can very nicely take all of the outside things not needed, throw it in the trash. It can keep the direction, your job list for the day, your the question your kid just answered or asked you so you can answer it effectively. It can keep important things and store those appropriately. Of course, threshold, we already talked about that. Hopefully it doesn't happen for a long time. But what happens is if you have lots of space here, you're going to take a long time to get the threshold because you have lots of space to throw things out before it builds. Kind of like Tetris, like the old Tetris games. It keeps coming at you faster and faster and faster, and it gets to the top. So the more space you have built in here, the better you're going to do at staying off threshold. What happens with little ones whose line is really, really high, okay? These are called our low processors. It's backwards, all right? The line up high on your cup means you process low. You need so much information dumping into your system that you have to fill pretty much the whole cup before the brain's awake. These are your little ones that are just grasping for anything. They're pulling everything out. They're grasping for high input, your jumpers, your climbers, your early morning chatty kiddos, and just woo, they are jumping off the walls. They are doing this, but what you normally will see is all of a sudden, out of the blue, and there'll be almost no trigger, they're going to crash. So you're going to get a brief sweet spot where they're very, and you're like, yes, they've calmed down. Now they're focused. Oh my gosh, now they're on the floor having a tantrum and they can't pull it together. Well, what happens is this space now is so narrow and they've absorbed all of this all day that by the time registration hits, now there's no time to sort. It's like the files are just piling up on the desk and you're at the end of the day, you got 20 minutes to fix this. You're never going to sort through all those files fast enough to dump the system to pull away from threshold. So they are registering, pinging, registering, pinging, registering, pinging. And so that's a really big struggle right here. On the opposite side of the spectrum are your very high registers. Again, opposite of your line. Line drops, high registers, meaning the body is highly responsive to all information. As soon as they get up in the morning, it's all just coming at them. They need nothing really to be registered. These are your kiddos that function beautiful in the morning. I mean, whoa, they are coming out the gate ready, focused, on point, on task. These are your great morning routine kids, super helpers in the classroom for that breakfast routine. They're on the spot for that carpet routine in the morning. These are these little guys that have this low registration. Pardon me, the lowered registration line, which is high register. That's these little guys. But the downfall is they burn so much of their space right here. The registration activates so early and so rapidly, and they're very responsive to everything that they burn all their energy out. And so you're going to lose focus in the afternoon. Okay. So quick, that was just really quick. There's other ways to look at that. I know some therapists have different ways of explaining, and I love listening to people's different ways of people identifying the system because it opens your eyes to new ways of viewing kiddos. But this is the one I found tends to make the most sense for me to explain. All right. So now we've got 3 concepts already. You know how many systems? 8. You know exactly where that system is processing, right smack in the middle of the brain. It's in 2 parts. Stores, jumps the line, the motor plan, and give you an action. And then you also know how it's entering and exiting the body, right? Based on the line. There's no way that we can ever perfectly summarize exactly where a kiddo's line is. There are assessments that can be done. The sensory assessment is fantastic for identifying high registration, low registration, low threshold, high threshold. And those pair together depending on where that registration line has moved in the system, basically. And so if you have a little one that you're very concerned for in the realm of incorrect response systems, then it may be really great to ask for an assessment with an OT or psychology, something like that, and look directly at that sensory assessment. That's going to give you more information, gives you a starting point. All right. So once I have that information, what the heck do I do with it, right? It's great to know things, but how do you know them and use them? So to do that, one of the things, sorry, I'm just in my papers, organizing my desk. One of the things that I love to do, and you'll see this in OT a lot, is create a sensory diet. So if we look at our kiddo based on the thought of their behaviors, okay, I'm going to take a day and just analyze my kid. Are they that early riser that is highly active in the morning and ready to achieve, and early afternoon crasher? Or is my kiddo very slow to be responsive and it takes all day, and then we ping threshold a lot? Evenings are going to be really hard. All right. So picking your child, assessing your child, kind of watching your kiddo just very passively. Okay. Watch your kiddo, just see what the response systems look like and when they're the most and least responsive. It's going to give you a good hint. When you figure that out and you want to pick one time of the day that you're like, I really want to know how to include sensory and the best time to include it, you're going to create what's called a sensory diet. This is a very complicated one. This is a very long one. This is an official. You're not going to create one this big, okay? This is what you're going to see a lot if you look them up online. You're going to see like big, full therapeutic sensory diets. That's going to be overwhelming. So what I want you to do with this one is throw it out. And I want you to do just 2 boxes on your piece of paper. The first box is your time of day. So let's say our little one has a really hard time getting moving in the morning, and you know this. You're not going to pull out anything that's messy. You're not going to turn the lights up bright. You're not going to have, crazy loud music. They're going to be seeking, but they're going to be not registering information coming in. So they're going to get overwhelmed. What can I put in their day? You're going to think of things that are calming. And if we think calm, many times we think deep pressure massage, right? So that's where the proprioceptive system comes in. Our little ones who are slow to rise and have to absorb lots of information, they need a calming and very consistent, self-controlled sensory. So you don't want to pull out your rice boxes. You don't want to pull out your Play-Doh. You're probably going to have little ones that eat it because they're going to use 2 senses at one time. Your rice boxes are going to get overwhelming because they're just going to want to fluff and pull in as much input as possible. So you're going to want to use weight or pressure. So those nice, slow, deep pressure hugs. So a quick note on hugs and patting and movement. When you are putting pressure into the body, a lot of times the question is, how much pressure do I need to use? Well, bodies are little, right? Our kiddos are small. We're big. And it can be a little bit scary to like squeeze your kid, or it can be scary to kind of push on their little joints or their hands because you don't want to squeeze too hard. But I also caution not to squeeze too lightly because light touch is tickly and that's very activating. And then you're actually bringing in a hypersensitive feeling into that system. Like, "Wah!" Okay. So we don't want to overstimulate by doing like, oh, come on, baby, like wake up. Our little ones that are like that, a quick reference for you is if you look at your nail bed and you just kind of pull, see that color change? That is not a lot of pressure. And the same thing if I was to push into my own, oh, my camera's glaring. There you go. Now you can see it. So I'm just pushing my fingers together. You feel that, right? So test it on yourself. Kind of just feel where that push comes in and you see the color change in your nail. That's about enough pressure to make sure that you're getting beyond. You have a settled push enough that you're bypassing that tickle phase. All right. So just enough pressure. It's really not that much. Okay. A good squeeze, a key with those types of deep pressure squeezes, hugs when we wake up, is we don't want to hug quick. So not quick and hard. It's a slow and then kind of just relax the body down. So if we're looking at the sensory diet, for example, I'm going to pick morning routine box 1, box 2, what am I going to put in it? My kiddo has a very high registration line, which means their threshold's right here. I know later today they've absorbed everything, they're going to crash. I want to feed their system now to get them to threshold, to get them to registration faster because I want to buy them time to sort throughout their day, especially before I send them off to school. All right. So you're going to think calm, very calming. You don't want activating activities like lots of squeeze and touch and throw and movement and sound and sight. You don't want activation. You want calm to feed in that system. So sensory diet, 2 boxes. Time of day, morning routine. Time of day can even be smaller increments. So breakfast, let's say breakfast is so hard. What is another thing you can do to activate the system? If your little one is hard to wake and they need lots of input in the morning, they could seem a little floppy. They're slumping out of their chair. They're leaning on the table. Okay. That body is not engaged enough to have full muscle activation or to appropriately understand the motor plan that we want in place. Sit up tall and move your spoon or use your fingers, whatever age we're dealing with. And so what we want to do is include things that are going to be calming, yes, but you can't put pressure at the table very well. There are ways to do that with like weighted lap pads and things like that. But if you want something that's pretty quick and simple, try raising their chair. Set them on a tall stool, that has the back on it, or get them in a tall high chair instead of the high chair that's just in the chair. That alone is going to be activation in the system because you're changing location of head in relation to environment. So if you want to activate this vestibular system, so you're kind of just quietly putting information into the body, it's not spinning. We're not jumping you around and activating like that where we're going to overwhelm. We're just increasing input. So we're passively putting something in there. Vestibular is a great way to do that. So raising that chair, getting on a tall table for that breakfast routine, or standing on one of those sink stairs. There's an official name for that, and it has left me on this Tuesday night. Don't remember what it is. Like the helper stools. Letting them stand while they eat. Something like that, a simple change like that increases sensory input to help them. Now, on the flip side, let's use morning routine. So we're down to that that sensory diet that's simplified, right? We don't want a big one. We're going to focus one thing at a time. So let's say our kiddo isn't the one who has the high line close to threshold. They're our little one that they hit the floor at 4:30 in the morning, rearing to go, and they're going to crash. All their energy is going to be gone. They've depleted themselves for the day. They're going to crash, and you know that. What are you going to help them do? Because their brain is on 100% mode right now. So you want to pull them back just a little bit, and you want to create enough sensory input in the body that calms them, but still keeps them at registration, right? So again, using your pressure is going to be really helpful. Those are your kiddos. That could be your morning Play-Doh kids. If you don't want to use Play-Doh, another really great option are the sensory cups. or like the rain sticks. So increasing sound in the system. That's a really great one for your high stimulating kids early in the morning. That's going to be a little bit less abrasive. It also includes a lot of finite motor movement. So you're activating small muscles, and that again raises the level of sensory input. So it's as simple as adding one toy to their option for morning play, or creating the opportunity to have a textured mat at the table. So then they can kind of brush that mat, and that's going to give them sensory input, but it's also going to calm the body and bring them down just a little bit, conserving energy. So then they have more brain space when they move on to the bigger part of their day. Weighted spoons, weighted utensils, that's a really fun thing to look into. And that does the same thing. And the cool thing with weight is, if we're looking at splitting activities, activating versus calming, weight can be both, depending on where the child's system is. So that's one of the fastest ways to kind of push the system into where it needs to be without having to overthink exactly where your child is. Caution with weight. I have to say this every time I talk about weight. Okay, what are my parameters? You never want to go more than 5 to 15% of your child's body weight on anything that's going to be on the body. So if it is a weighted vest, if it's, I like to take a big knee sock and put rice in it, and then you weigh it, and it lays on their hip joint, like right across the line of the hip. If they're sitting at the table, that's a really great way to put sensory information into the body that's passive and self-controlled, right? They can take it off. They don't like it, put it on if they do, that kind of thing. So never over 15%, because then you're just fatiguing muscles, and that's going to be too much. That gets into the dangerous zone. Word of advice, always start at the lowest end. I go 4.5%, maybe 5% of the body weight to start, because it's easier to add weight in small increments than it is for a child to become dependent on high weight and then take it away. All right. So we don't want to do that. Start low, 4 to 5% of their body weight if it's coming onto the body. If it's a weighted spoon, something like that's going to be way less than that. And then you're just going to go on feeling what they have response to. Those are a lot of fun. Textured strips, put Velcro underneath the table, stick it to the bottom of the table. That's something for them to kind of play with. A band around the bottom of the chair for them to tuck their feet so they can kick. Also passive, it's pressure, it's motor planning, it's movement, it's quiet, it's calming. So things like that are going to be really helpful as you watch your kiddo. So something that I want to put up for you guys, and I will probably sometime this week, I'll put up a list of mommy and me activities that are really great. And what's fun is I did not organize them in any kind of order on this list, because something you can do is go through and pick, would this be a calming activity for my kid? Would this be a activating activity, a calming activity, activating, and see if you can figure out what system it belongs in. And then a second thing I like to do is figure out what system I'm working with. So I'll put this list up as well. I use this one a lot of my trainings, but this one goes through specific types of visual that you can include. Lots of times when we think sensory, we think touch, 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 touch. We can overwhelm one system. So if we think of everything coming up the back of the brain, it's coming from one spot. So that part of the brain is going to need a nap. Okay, so you can ping threshold really quick. So if you notice your kiddo has one primary sensory system activated all day, or mostly in the morning or during that hard routine, pick a different system to plug an activity in for, whether it be visual or oral. Smell is a really big one. Sound's a really big one. Okay, so I hope that was helpful. I'm going to jump off, and I'll talk to you guys again next week about the new topic. I am so excited that you joined me today. Thank you. Bye.